Hi, my name is Dennis Trawnitschek. I'm the Group CTO at SCBX. Please join me on the Forward podcast with Smart OSC. We're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of SCBX, how we embrace change in today's environment, what do we think about AI and other disruptive technologies, and what it takes to be a good leader.
Stop being just an enabler that takes orders from the business. Stop that. Technology has to be part of every business. I do think in an area where I work at technology, there is no such thing as this is it. Change is a constant, and you can either embrace it or you can think you can try to hold on to what you do. I do believe you have to embrace it. Banking business used to be low risk, low return. But we don't believe it's going to stay like that. We're going to make this AI change a real change, right? And it's going to impact every one of us and all of us.
Dennis, you are very welcome to the Forward podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite. I'm really looking forward to an interesting discussion today. And glad to be here.
Thank you. Now, we always start this conversation at the deep end. I'm going to ask you, what moves you forward in your life and in your career?
That is indeed quite off the deep end. But look, let me share a few things that actually have been guiding me for the past 20-something years that I've been moving around in my career. Actually, I bring it down to 3 pronouns that I look at. So the first one is a Chinese one. It actually says, when the wind of change blows, some build walls and some build windmills. Why is this important for me? I do think in an area where I work at technology, there is no such thing as this is it. Change is a constant, and you can either embrace it or you can think you can try to hold on to what you do. I do believe you have to embrace it. And that's why I think this is a very important thing. And this actually helps you to stay fresh, helps you to keep your mind open, and also helps you to understand that you have to reinvent yourself constantly. The second pronoun, I think, is, if I'm not wrong, Socrates, but don't quote me on it. It actually goes as, if you think you are someone, you have stopped to become someone. So I think this one is also, it's again about embracement of change, but it's also very important that when you grow more mature and more senior in your career, you actually don't need to think you know it better than anyone. You actually constantly, particular for me, I'm getting more and more distant to what's actually happening on the ground. So I think it's very important that you recognize there is lifelong learning. You should listen to everyone. It doesn't matter if your title says something different. Everybody has an opinion. You should listen to everybody's views and also start and continue to basically embrace people sharing ideas, people sharing things around you. And you should always keep in mind that you should not settle for being someone. You're still becoming someone, and you can still change along the way. And the third one is actually, and I'm not sure where this one is from, but I do like it. If you always swim with the current, you will never reach the spring, which basically means like, look, it's going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. And particularly in the area of technology, and if you want to embrace change, if you want to do new things, there are no easy solutions. You have to push, you have to go. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it doesn't feel good, but you have to just keep going, right? Easy is not going to get you anywhere, and nothing great has ever been created from easy. So I think these 3 pronouns are very important for me, have guided me through the last 20-something years of my career, and have helped me to adapt to change and to move where I'm at the moment.
I love that so much. There's so much in that people will take value from, especially even that hitting a level doesn't exist. You're never going to hit an upper level and leave it at that. There's always room to change, to grow, to learn. And sometimes there's that misconception of, well, I'm going to get to this point and leave it there. I've done my bit, but it's an ever-flowing state of affairs. Yes. I love that. And when I look at your career, you've always seemed like that type of person who likes to stay ahead or is always 2 steps ahead. And maybe that goes back to that beginning part where you've just constantly been looking to learn, build and grow. So I'd love to talk about your career journey to date, starting where you were with Siemens Business Services as an intern, to then going up to the big three of the big 4 as spearheading their IT solutions strategies, to where you are now with SCBX. So what were the key moments throughout that career journey that led you to where you are?
So I had a lot of very interesting moments, a lot of good experience. But if I need to boil it down to some of the key moments, actually, one of the key changes, and that I benefited so much from it, like later on in my career, was my very first touch when I first came to Thailand. I'm originally from Germany, but my first touch point with Thailand was when I was working with Siemens Business Services. I was very lucky. I was a grade in University of Applied Sciences in Germany, Pforzheim. Shout out to my old professor, Morelli, actually, who allowed me to, number one, write my thesis and working as an intern overseas, which was not common in Germany in 2004. Number two, was bold enough to say it's okay to write it in English, even though it is more difficult for him to correct. And number three, pushed me to work on a topic which is no table stakes, but at that point in time was very new. It was about ITIL and about how do you implement service support processes, service management processes. And that helped me from three areas. Number one, I had to swim in a completely different country, different environment. I've never worked in Thailand really before, so I just came and tried to adapt, tried to learn. Number two, there was a topic that I didn't know much about. There was not a whole lot where you could go and say like, oh, there's a heaps of books and things published about it, because it was relatively new at that point in time. So I learned to basically look into new things, build my own opinion, try to drive it basically. And I think that was one of the key pivotal moments in my career that helped me, because I learned a lot from it when I started. If I look back the second time, actually started with something negative. In 2009, there was something small called the global financial crisis. I was a consultant in Deloitte in Germany at that time. I was just about to move from senior consultant to manager. But once the GFC actually hit, the markets dried down, there was no work, and I didn't get a promotion. And at that point in time, I felt very upset about that. So what I actually did, I looked around, and just by chance, I looked into my LinkedIn, and one of my ex-colleagues, who was a big Australia fan, German guy, but big Australia fan, posted on his LinkedIn that they're looking for people in tech strategy for Ernst & Young in Australia. So I just dropped him a message and said, like, does that also apply for people not yet living in Australia? He said, yes, sure. So fast forward 4 months from that moment, I was on a plane touching down for the first time in my life in Sydney, basically, and started working there for 3 years. Got awesome opportunities to work on new things, to change my career focus more from manufacturing in Germany to financial services and other things. Had the opportunity to help to write EY's global IT strategy method at that point in time, and gave me a lot of opportunity. Why was that important? Again, there was an opportunity. You just have to take it sometimes, and you do it, and it's changed for better. I also fast-tracked. I was hired as a manager. I was promoted to senior manager within just 2 years, which was record time, basically, and moved along. I was also very lucky because I met my beautiful wife there, and we got together there and weekend there. And I think then, if I can do two more.
Yeah, of course.
The next one was, I loved Australia. My wife loved Australia, but a very senior partner that I worked with in Deloitte when I was still in Germany knew that I always liked Southeast Asia. I actually wanted to come back somewhere to Southeast Asia. At that point in time, Deloitte was hiring people to build strategy practices. So I got the opportunity to come back to Bangkok. That was 12 years ago. I'm still here. And I basically worked with them. And again, an opportunity which I tried to pursue by myself came kind of like out of nowhere, right? And then when an opportunity comes, you just have to basically grab it, right? And I think then the last pivotal moment in my career was actually when I had the opportunity to step into my current role. I've been a management consultant, technology consultant, digital consultant, however you want to call it, for many, many years. SCB at that point was a client of mine very long. I had a great mentor and friend who was also a client, basically. She stepped down from her role, and all of a sudden, Konatit, our CEO, asked me, don't you want to join SCBX? And I thought, well, let's talk to him, understand. He said, as the group CTO, which was a big surprise for me, because normally when you come from consulting, it's not that easy to pick up such senior roles. And I think there was also just an opportunity that came, right? You cannot really plan for it. It just happens, basically. So I think these 4 moments are some of the things that actually helped me to drive, to embrace change, to understand sometimes it's difficult, but you just try it out. It turns out good, and then just go along and basically change along the way if you can.
Whoa, what a journey! And it's almost like you just say yes to all of these great things and then see what happens afterwards, which is brilliant. And looking at SCBX now, what is described as the mothership of financial technology. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because going from a point of change, which is something that's come up a lot already, it was a traditional heritage bank, and now moving to having a metamorphosis, mothership of financial technology. Firstly, what do you mean by mothership? And secondly, what was the trigger point for this metamorphosis?
So I think we have to go back to our heritage. We are very proud of our heritage. We've been first bank in Thailand, biggest or second biggest, depends on how you actually measure. But we and this was before I joined, but basically our CEO Kunatit always said, like, banking business used to be low risk, low return. But we don't believe it's going to stay like that. The role of the intermediary of banks overall is challenged with all the things that are happening around us. And I mean, we had a bit of a crypto winter, but there's still the belief that you actually can remove the intermediary from the whole system, and you don't really have an issue with that. Number two, to really change fundamentally, it's very difficult if you carry a proud heritage with you. So SCB has, when it was still the bank, has done a lot, right? We were the first ones to drop fees on QR payment and basically change the whole system in Thailand. We did a lot of things, but fundamentally the incubation of change was difficult because a bank is still a bank, and a bank needs to be run risk averse in a degree that you can actually do it. People are entrusting you with your money. There's regulators that want to make sure for a very good reason, right? So that's why the idea was born. Why don't we try to think about it differently? And why don't we start to look into building purpose-built areas, purpose-built companies that actually serve different segments, different areas, even different technologies, different purpose than the original bank, and spread it out into a group to help us to change better. To embrace the change, right? And that was the inflection point when basically the idea of SCBX was born. Why are we the mothership? Because we were also the actual legal entity SCBX, which is no stock listed. We delisted the bank, listed the holding company, which owns most of our subsidiaries 100%. We have a few JVs as well. Is to say we are the custodians of the change. We actually need to create the value. And the idea was to say we have the bank we just posted a record profit basically with the bank, right? And we're very proud of our bank, and they are very strong and doing very strong work. But what we said is, why don't we use the profits that the bank generates and seed them into other areas of business to make us future proof? Because while we're there for over 100 years, we want to be around for another 100 of years. And as I mentioned earlier, we have to change, right? So that's the idea. And the mothership, why are we the mothership? Because we have to steer that transition. We have to make sure we orchestrate everything within the group of companies while giving them a lot of independence as well. Because you cannot be really good at what you do if you follow everyone following the same structure. But that's the idea of the mothership. That's the idea. And the fundamental thought was to say, we do not believe that it's going to be low risk, low return forever, and we have to adjust to that, and we have to be ready for the future and transform now while we still can, before we're in crisis mode, basically.
That foresight is brilliant because not a lot of people will do that, and we'll talk about that a little later on. But in terms now, going back to you as well and your role as the CTO, because you're like, well, this is a surprise, and being asked to be a CTO. When we were talking previously, before we came into this discussion, you mentioned something about your role and how it's not really your standard CTO role. Can we talk a little bit about that as well before we move in?
Sure. So when I started the role, I had a lot of people congratulating me. Obviously, lots of vendors want to come to meet you, right? And a lot of people, and you get a lot of flowers and things saying like, oh, great, you're running the bank now as a CTO. And I said, no, I'm not running the bank. And I'm also not running our Card X business. I'm not running our Auto X business. What we actually say is, from a technology perspective, the typical role of a CTO, which is more an operator in the background, right? To make sure systems run smooth, we don't have incidents, we have all of this. This is what the CTOs in the different subsidiaries do. None of them reports to me, basically. They look at their own ones, basically. So I'm not this type of like operational CTO, but my job is different. My job is, number one, help to embrace innovation, find new technologies, find new ways of working, and gradually move that into the group. We look at things like the technologies for AI. We look at other things. We're trying to do more innovations. That's one big part of my role. My other big part of my role is to support our business development teams who look at our investments. We just acquired Home Credit for 100% in Vietnam as an example. But part of my accountability is also to make sure we get we're looking at it right from a technology perspective. We look at it embracing technology. We're doing that. And then last but not least, and this is actually the most important part, because if you look at the bigger picture, when we were the bank, we were like most of the other banks, a big consumer of technologies, lots of third parties, lots of consultants, lots of like finished, fixed solutions. And where we actually want to move more to is being more like a fintech. We do more of our own solutions. We embrace technology. Technology actually becomes part of the DNA of us, basically. And that's why I also always say, like, if I do my job right, we don't need a CTO anymore, because everyone will be a CTO. And if you look at like how the real fintechs, the real digital banks, the real digital businesses actually are running, there is no real technology and IT function, because everybody is part of that. So actually my job is to make myself not needed anymore. Let's say not needed in the role of group CTO anymore. I have other things to contribute, but I think that's a bit different. So not that typical role of like chief technology officer looking at that, much more embracing change, bringing new things in and making sure we spend efficiently, and then also orchestrate synergies within the group, that we bundle our spend on certain areas, etc.
It's really nice, because when you said that, what came to my mind was that literacy of allowing everyone to have access to knowledge in terms of technology, because it will be everything everywhere all at once in the future. And it enables people to feel empowered to make decisions in the future within an organization, and they're not missing out on anything. So it's wonderful to hear that. You don't hear that very often. I want to do my job so that I don't have to continue it for others. But in terms of AI, because you mentioned that quickly there was a study from Cisco late last year, which was, I think, 14% of leaders were going to be fully equipped to delve more into having an AI strategy. And even with that, there were barriers in terms of policies, infrastructure, data, culture, people. For SCBX, you have AI at the center of your strategy as a growth accelerator. Can you tell us how you've managed to do that while so many people are struggling, and what the plan is for this?
So, first of all, I think AI is for us not a tech topic, right? Actually, one thing we do make very clear is AI is a topic of every chief, right? And it's not just for tech. And we also have a subsidiary DataX that specifically takes care about data and AI, but it's a team sport, right? That's number one, basically. And it's also very important we embrace the change from the top. And it starts with our CEO, even up to our board. AI is a topic that's important, right? And we do believe it is a big disruptor and enabler at the same time, to new businesses, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that we're that much better than anyone else. We all have our struggles. But I think if you look at like our recipe that we've tried so far, there's a couple of things to mention. So number one, the tone from the top, and then the top needs to walk the talk, right? So meaning you have to constantly showcase how you're using the different AIs, from Gen AI over more traditional MN learning and other things, basically, to help to drive, and how do we measure that impact, right? But it starts with small things that you use it yourself, you embrace the change, right? Number two, what we are doing is there's no AI without data. So we take our data infrastructure and the ability to use data very serious. We have a dedicated subsidiary called DataX that's taking care of that part. It's obviously not easy because we are in a highly regulated industry. And if I look at like the things that make it most difficult for us, are not necessarily, it's actually not about technologies. It's a lot of like making sure we do all of this, being fully aware that we have to be making sure we are compliant, we doing all of this right. And it's not that easy, that part, because the regulators aren't that clear what it actually means. There is a lot of technologies that are popping up here and there, but fully understanding them, understanding what it actually does, how we manage the risk and all of that is not that straightforward sometimes. And it takes quite some time to manage through the things like PDPA. For us, it's particularly difficult because we are a group. So we have to think about what is customer consent in that, what can we use, what can we not use, right? There's lots of these things. But setting that aside, we are aware of that. We're working on it. We have great teams who try to find solutions rather than problems. And that's a big change to the risk awareness and the level of risk that you are able to accept if you're just a bank than what we can actually do, because we're a little bit different. We also understand why we say it's important from the top. It's also very important to embrace the change along the way. So we created an AI champion program. We have dedicated people basically who we had their supervisors signing up that they can put a certain percentage, so it's a day a week for us basically, into understanding the technologies that we use, understanding the use cases, understanding what it actually means. Because similar to what I mentioned very early in my career, you didn't really know, and there's not a lot of all around what you can leverage on. It's kind of like the same for AI. It's not like, oh, let's open the book to step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're done. These books are either not written or they exist in some podcasts or some other ideas. So you have to actually trial and error.
Yes.
And for that, you need to create the environment that people actually are okay to trial and error, both from a capacity, but also doing that while we cannot break the system over. So that's another important part. And then we look at AI literacy as a core KPI as well. So we need to equip everyone, because again, like we can have millions of data scientists. We obviously have not enough, but the data scientist who doesn't understand the business is not going to help you. Yeah. So we actually need to make people in the business understand what AI can do and cannot do for them, and start experimenting around. So we have to bring that up. And then obviously we have a number of partners as well that we work with, right? And that's the way we're trying to orchestrate. But we had to dial adjust quite a bit along the way, and we're still learning. And I wouldn't say we through it yet. I don't think we have yet the breakthrough and everything, but we're trying to get there.
The context is everything in that as well. Even from that side, for the data scientists, having the context, but the context isn't there really yet. You mentioned there as well, showcasing it from the top down as well. And I saw you had done a presentation and talk recently where you're like, AI did these slides for me. I really like that. It's like, well, this is how I'm using it. How are you going to use it? Moving on to what you mentioned there around experimentation. That is something I really wanted to know with you in the process of what you're working on as a group. Balancing experimentation with new technology or tools that we are still learning about, balancing that with safety. How are you navigating that path?
So this is a good question, and it's probably one that there's no like straightforward, easy answer to it. But I think number one, there's different types of experimentation and different levels along the journey. So one thing we actually did was, traditionally experimentation meant for us, we use a finished technology, try to apply it to our environment. We still do that. But for these technologies, we look into, are they safe for us? So for instance, is the data safe in there and all of these components, which we do with some of our big partners, and we know they're okay, and then people can just experiment. But that is for me more on the incremental change, which is very important, because not all the AI change is going to be big change that's going to change everything and new business models. A lot of this is like, how can we do our small stuff better, right? So give you an example. I just had today talked to one of my team, my governance team. I asked them to create a real-time dashboard for our cyber exposure, basically. And this is one of our AI champions. And traditionally, the way it would have worked, we write down the requirements, we get someone to look into it, someone will do the coding, testing, and all of that. And for what we actually try to do, we estimated would be 3 to 4 weeks. What he did was he doesn't know how to code. This is Power, basically. Power is the Power BI. He didn't really know how to code that, but he understood the business problem. He went to GPT and asked, here's some code. Can you optimize it for me? Can you help me for this to run faster, basically? And within 35 hours, we had a real-time dashboard, basically. When the CEO requested it a week ago, the week after, we had it basically ready. So this is the incremental change that you can do safely, because we know that data is not going to leave our environment. Nothing is going to happen to it, basically, and we can just experiment. But that's only one part of the equation. That's the incremental change. That's how you can drive productivity. What we also did, and you might have seen in the news, we signed partnerships with Stanford, with NIT. And what we're actually doing is to try to move up that research and development value chain. Because we are here, particularly when it comes to generative AI, Thailand is a bit limited, because the large language models don't really work for Thai yet that well. So we said we have to do something with it. So we're also doing more and more applied research. We not do fundamental research. That's not where we are, but we move up into the applied research. We have our partnerships. We have an R&D team, basically, that looks into embracing that change, and not just for AI, for other things as well. But that is an environment where we have no customer data, no actual business impact. So we create these sandboxes and these environments to actually try and error, basically, around. And I think the combination of looking at it like moving up the R&D value chain into more applied research, more out, which we as a bank would have never done. Yeah. But every single technology company does it, actually, and you need to do it, and you need to dedicate time and investment into it to really try to innovate, plus having that more incremental change that we actually trying to apply in the day-to-day working, where we make sure that the tools are okay, that the data doesn't leave our environments, that we maybe experiment first a little bit more, not directly with the customer, but more in the background, all of these things. And I think these things together help us to safeguard, because there is no one answer. And a lot of this is like a lot of discussions I have with our risk and compliance colleagues is, as a bank, you tend to say, if it's not 100% white, it must be black.
Yeah.
Meaning, if it's not explicitly said you can do it, it's not there. While as a tech company, it's probably more, okay, if it's not black, there must be some gray and we can do it. And that's one of the things we're actually working around as well. But we take our responsibilities to our customers, to our regulators, to the overall jurisdictive oversight and everything very, very serious, and making sure we control. But it's about like understanding what happens and understanding where you have to stop, when you have to stop, and then combining these things, basically.
Wow. It's just brilliant to see, because it's, again, you're ultimately changing so much of what was the traditional, we've always done it this way, and merging that, well, startups and tech companies do it this way. So let's find that gray area between us, and that action design research idea of try, test, and work within your stakeholders, take that learning inside, and then start testing it outside, which, again, you don't see a lot of. It's very new in that space. Creating a culture, which now is something that is a huge undertaking, but creating a culture of that thinking and that way of working, how does that begin? How does that get nurtured? How will that go moving forward?
So the first question for us is, do we need to have one culture, or is it many cultures where we have some common values, right? That help us to drive it? Because should we have the same culture in a 20,000 people bank compared to 80 people digital lender? Maybe not, right? I mean, we haven't finally answered that question, but my personal view is culture needs to follow the business that you're working on, and we're not trying to make everybody work the same, because we would have a big problem if the banks start operating like a very small fintech, or even like we have businesses that just do tech implementation or tech work. We cannot work. But it's about like creating some common values. It's about making sure that we set the right KPIs, set the right direction. The tone from the top needs to be there. So I spend a lot of time also like in trying to embrace that change by talking to the CEOs of the different businesses, trying to explain what we want to do, right? And I think that's part of it. The second part is basically we have to incentivize and basically do it. And I think our culture at SCBX, and when I say SCBX, I mean the legal entity that actually holds it, the 200 people that we have at the heart of what we actually do. We try to embrace this even more. But a common set of values, a common set of ideas, and a common set of like KPIs help with driving that change. But it's not easy and it's not straightforward. It's also very important to constantly communicate, right? So I spent so many hours on calls trying to explain to people, and not just CEOs, but also DPOs and DGOs and whoever else, basically just trying to explain what the change is and why we need to do that, right? But again, it's something, again, I don't think there is an end to it, right? And at the moment, it's like coming back to the pronouns in the beginning. I'm trying to swim, not with the current, but against the current, but I'm nowhere near the spring yet, right? And I think that's for us as an organization. We have to learn, we have to adapt, right? But the tone from the top is very important. The embracement, and then also making sure successes and people who do it, we actually highlight that to the rest as well and say, like, this is great, right? We've done that well, and move along with it. But it is difficult. I think aside from the compliance and the risk, the cultural part is extremely difficult.
There will be no end to it, but once you get to it, I think, write a book. There's going to be such a good playbook for this. Honestly, it's going to be great, and we'll have to have you on again. Looking at disruption. Again, watching a video from you, you likened this time that we are in to that of the beginning of the internet. And there's a book that it made me think of, which was The Fourth Industrial Revolution with Klaus Schwab. And that was talking about how a lot of leaders can tend to, and it's that idea of, when should you fix the roof? When it's raining, or not when it's raining, when it's sunny. But it's the idea of being too busy focusing on problem solving for today instead of having the foresight to look at the problems coming down the line. Have you any advice for leaders in this space looking ahead at this disruptive period that we are going to be in, that we are in?
Yeah. So I think you watched my previous talk, so let me bring some of the example back here, because I think this is very important to keep that in mind, right? So one of my examples that I like to use was Barnes & Nobles used to be the biggest book distributor in the US, by far. They spent hundreds of millions, and I can't remember the exact number, basically, on trying to take their business to the internet, because that time the internet was something new, right? Was something, it's nice, but we really haven't seen what it can actually do in terms of disruption. It was starting, right? And they spent so much money and doing so much work on trying to do. But what they actually did was just put exactly the same business that they had before onto the internet. And that's not the real change. And then came Amazon, right? And we know like what actually happened, right? So this part is what I personally think we have not seen yet with AI, but I do believe there will be this level of disruption, and these companies, they are in the making probably somewhere. There are some startups somewhere with some great ideas, with some great things basically that help happen to change the thing. We haven't seen it. There is some early examples, right? I like to refer to that example. I forgot her name, but there's a social influencer who was the very first who actually created an AI basically mini-me of her, and you could pay to chat with her, and it talked like her and did things like that, and it was a very small amount. She made a whole lot of money with that, right? Because she could replicate herself into that, and people were really excited for that. It's just a small example. So I don't think we have seen this change yet. So what is my advice? Well, I haven't experienced that level of disruption yet myself, but what I'm trying to do, the way I like to look at it is, number one is like, never be certain. Right? Never be certain of anything, and try to understand what's happening, try to look out and try to see it. So I spend a lot of time like listening to podcasts basically around about, because I think it's not yet that you have a standardized. So it's more like getting some ideas from people. And I think podcasts are an awesome way of accessing ideas from people. You always have to contextualize to you. Number two is like, never think it cannot be done. That is also very important, right? Because who would have thought that you can actually run a book business without having any physical presence where people can look into into the books. If you would have asked before Amazon, no one, no, you barely go to the store anymore, right? And it's kind of like normal. So I think things are changing. Things are actually going to be different. And I think the third thing is to try to understand what are the behaviors that where customers are changing that could disrupt your business, because in the end we all need to do with customers. For us it's a bit different because we don't have any end customers, but our businesses have, and kind of like keep an open mind, right? Try to see what's happening. Don't disregard anything as like it's not working, it's not this, it's not that. I'm a strong believer that from everything you can learn something. Sometimes you just learn how to not do it, but that's a learning as well. And keep that open mind, because as I mentioned, like I'm waiting for the real big disruption, and I'm sure it's going to come, right? Maybe it's first going to come in areas like entertainment, right? You can see that already with the new OpenAI. Why don't I get a movie just for myself,
right,
that no one else actually can see, right? And that's the ideas that are already there. I think there's more basically
personalized movies.
Yes.
Yeah. And even just the ability to be singer-songwriters if you want.
Exactly. I mean, there's an incredible amount, and that's the ideas that are already out there. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure there's ways how you don't need a bank anymore, how you don't need a whatever else, right? I'm also thinking like the ability is going to be incredible. Just listen yesterday to a podcast around how AI is going to change the need for software developers as well.
Yes.
Because all of a sudden the cost for developing software is going to go down. So there will be a whole lot of new business models which were never viable because they never could afford the access to proper software development, which now all of a sudden is going to change, right? So I think the possibilities are almost unlimited, and that's why you have to stay open-minded, vigilant, and kind of like so, and also be okay with to say, I tried it and it didn't work, right? Don't stick to what you think has to work. If you figure out it doesn't work, drop it, change it, and do something else.
That's brilliant. The limitless possibilities is something that we've been looking at as well. And also you mentioned there, one of our guests mentioned that too, in terms of software engineers as well, which is the world, the future is going to be so interesting, and it's really exciting, terrifying as well. We do a quick fire section on this podcast based on the name, the Forward Podcast. We like to ask our guests what they are going to bring forward and what they'd like to leave behind in order to keep going. For you, we're going to ask the three things, if you can, that SCBX are bringing forward into the future. And then I'll follow up with the next one after that.
Three things that we're going to bring forward. So number one is we're going to make this AI change a real change, right? And it's going to impact every one of us and all of us, and we make sure we're committed to have 75% of our revenue AI enabled. So we really going to take that forward. Number two, we started the journey and we've made some progress on being more of a tech company. We're nowhere there, but we're not going to drop that. We actually have a lot of new things, which not all of them I can share yet, but where we're trying to change our tech value chain, trying to change our ability to do more. And a lot of that is related to the first topic, but a lot of it is also not there to basically drop it, right? But last but not least, as a company, we will never drop our heritage completely, right? So we are very proud of our heritage. This is what's funding currently the change. So we have to also embrace and basically recognize that our heritage is the bank and is financial services, and that will stay a very important part of our journey forward, and we will not drop that.
It's wonderful. So it's not out with the old, but it's that convergence of both, which is really interesting. And secondly, CTOs, what should three things they should leave behind in order to move forward?
Well, that's a good question. Let me think a second about that. Three things they should leave behind, basically. Number one is stop being just an enabler that takes orders from the business. Stop that. Technology has to be part of every business. So you should be sitting together with your business leaders, or become a business leader, actually. That you need to stop doing that, basically. Number two is try to stop to rely on third parties too much, right? There's lots of very good third parties out there. They're doing a very good job. But if you really want to embrace technology change, you have to get deeper into the value chain. You basically have to move, basically, and have to try it. And then number three, again, probably AI related, but stop thinking in old ways of, oh, I need to write the code, I need to test it this way, that way. Try to think about how you can use that for operations, for all of the other things, and basically stop thinking in the old ways, which worked for a very long time, and try to do it differently moving forward.
Love that. Love that. There's people taking note now. What do you think makes a good leader for today's world?
So, number one is, it comes back to what I said in the very beginning, right? In today's world, as a leader, you cannot know everything, right? So you need to have the ability to listen to everyone, to think about it, to progress it. It doesn't mean you always have to agree with everyone. Listen to everyone. Don't think about seniority, because how many people are exactly there that have 20 years in Gen AI experience? Zero, right? So someone who is maybe a lot more junior than me in his or her career might have a lot more experience in terms of using it, because they could spend their whole time in doing it, right? So listen to everyone regardless of rank, of status, of any of that, and that's something I really try to embrace with my own teams as well, right? I don't know everything. Someone has to own the decision in the end and the accountability, but that doesn't mean you have to know everything. You should basically listen. So that's one very important part. Number two, I think it's very important that you dedicate a certain amount of your time into innovation and people as well. But I think on the people I touched already. So I think the innovation, that kind of like learning, like I do all types of learning, from LinkedIn learning over whatever else, right? Just to keep myself equipped with skills I don't have, because I just never learned about that, right? So I think that part is important as well for a good leader, that you actually make sure you're there, right? But the last part, I think, not just listen, but nurture your people, nurture your teams, make sure they understand. Like, to me, I talk a lot about AI in this podcast, basically, but it's not about like that we don't need people. We need people. It's just that I hope they can do a lot more of the exciting and fun stuff, and a lot of the not so fun stuff can be basically outside. But take care of your people, look after them, make sure they do stuff that they feel they can excel in, because like finding the right people is the most difficult job, actually. And I spent so much of my time in just trying to find people, and we struggle in so many areas. So it's important that you take care of your people, right? So I think these are the three things I would say a good leader needs to do.
Love it. That nurturing people is so nice as well, because it's so true in terms of finding good people, but also allowing the frills to be cut off, maybe some of the extra parts to be cut off the roles, but more time to be empowered to keep learning and to keep growing and take risks and have a bit of fun too, because it doesn't all have to be, work. And finally, you'd be used to being asked, what advice would you give to your younger self? But I'd love to ask, any advice you'd like to give to your future self?
That's a very good question, and it's kind of like the other. So number one is, I think, and that has worked so far from my past self to my today self, is like, don't forget where you come from. Don't forget like
your heritage.
What's important. You don't forget your heritage. Don't forget that it hasn't mattered that much if something didn't work now. It might not be that important in the future as well. So I think that's one thing for my future self. I think re-emphasizing on what I think went as a thread through this whole discussion is, even my future self, even when I'm like, my future self is going to be old, right? I'm old already, so it's going to be even older. Don't stop learning, right? And I take, like, for that one, I look at my late grandpa, basically, but he learned how to use a PC at the age of 71, right? So I hope when I'm there, whatever it is, it's not going to be a PC for sure, but whatever it is, I keep learning and I don't get basically stuck, basically, right? And then I think maybe the third thing is try to share what you have, but also understand that when I'm in the future, what I think today or what I've learned is maybe not that relevant anymore. But I think there's certain key messages that remain important. What I've learned, for instance, from my grandpa, who gave me a lot of advice. He didn't know anything about technology in the way that I did, but a lot of like fundamental things. I think my future self should remember to pass that down to the next generation as well.
The fundamentals. Love that. With that, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Dennis. It was great to have you on the podcast, and I'm wishing you all of the best in SCBX and your future self too. Thank you.
Thank you.